This time, they contained two thighs, and eventually the most chilling discovery. On June 10th, a severed head was found in yet another bag. The police knew they were dealing with a gruesome crime, one that was becoming more intricate with each passing day. But they were still without any answers. No missing person reports matched the body parts they had recovered. No one in the area had witnessed anything suspicious. The puzzle pieces weren't fitting together. The question on everyone's mind was, who was this man, and why had he been butchered and scattered across the city? By this point, the case had captured the public's attention. News outlets were covering the investigation, but the police were still struggling to identify the victim. The victim's family, if they even existed, remained out of reach. The authorities had little to go on except the grisly trail left in the field. There were no fingerprints, no ID, no distinctive markings. Only the horrific reality of a man's body torn apart, piece by piece. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation seemed to be at a standstill. No fresh leads had emerged, and the police had exhausted every possibility they could think of. They had questioned neighbors, reviewed all nearby CCTV footage, and even reached out to local hospitals for any clues. But it wasn't until the police turned their attention to the surrounding homes that they finally caught a break. Through a painstaking review of security camera footage, they found something. On June 2nd, just days before the first body parts were found, a pair of figures were spotted near the field under the cover of night. The footage wasn't perfect. The images were grainy, and the figures were shrouded in darkness. But it was clear that one of them was carrying a heavy bag. The figures moved quickly, entering the field at around 12:44 a.m. and leaving less than 10 minutes later. The footage was enough to spark suspicion. The two figures in the video were none other than Poonam and Deepak, the very people who had lived with Anjas Dasis. Their presence at the crime scene at that exact time was no coincidence. The police were now sure they were dealing with a family tragedy. But what had happened in that house? Why had Poonam and Deepak been involved in the death of someone they knew so intimately? The police knew they were on the cusp of a breakthrough, but they still needed more evidence to confirm their suspicions. They traced the footage to the house where Poonam and Deepak lived. It was clear now that they were part of the investigation, but the police needed solid proof. They couldn't risk making a mistake. They had to be sure. It wasn't until mid-June that the police were able to definitively link the body parts to a missing person. Despite all the efforts, it had taken longer than expected. But finally, through relentless questioning and investigation, the authorities linked the body parts to Anjas Dasis. The police discovered that Anjan had been missing for over a month. He had last been seen in early May, but no one had filed a missing persons report for him. His disappearance had gone unnoticed, just as the body parts had been carelessly discarded. The shock hit everyone hard. The man whose dismembered remains had been scattered across the city was no stranger to those around him. Anjan's life, once filled with lies and manipulation, had ended in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. What was most disturbing to the police, however, was how close the murder had been to those who had once called him family. But this discovery only deepened the mystery. How could Poonam, his partner of many years, and Deepak, his stepson, be involved in such a horrific crime? What led them to butcher a man they had lived with? As the investigation continued, the pieces began to fit together. But there were still many questions left unanswered. In the weeks that followed, the police dug deeper into Anjan's life. The investigation revealed a pattern of deceit, abuse, and betrayal, particularly toward Poonam and her family. Anjan's secret life, including his wife and children in Bihar, had been the catalyst for the breakdown of his relationship with Poonam. But the true motive for murder lay in a series of explosive revelations. With the mounting evidence and their involvement now undeniable, Poonam and Deepak found themselves cornered. The police had pieced together the puzzle, and their suspicions had evolved into certainty. The CCTV footage, the testimony from neighbors, and the discovery of Anjan's body parts left little room for doubt. The question now was how to get a confession from them. Poonam and Deepak had remained silent for days, their minds running wild with guilt, fear, and disbelief at what they had done. But the authorities knew the truth. They had connected the dots: Poonam's betrayal, Deepak's rage, and the quiet, brutal murder that followed. After hours of questioning, Poonam finally broke. She began speaking in quiet tones, her words filled with remorse, but also the clarity that comes from a mind that has already reconciled the horror of their actions. She explained how Anjan's behavior had pushed her to the edge. His deception, his manipulation, and his treatment of her daughter and Deepak's wife had created a festering anger within her, a betrayal that had gone too far. Poonam's voice trembled as she explained that the abuse of her daughter, someone she was sworn to protect, was the final straw. It wasn't just the financial deceit anymore. It was the psychological toll, the feeling of powerlessness in a relationship she had once believed was built on trust. Deepak, too, had his moment of clarity during the interrogation. His face, hardened with anger, softened as he relived the night of the murder. He admitted that his stepfather's crossing of boundaries, the way Anjan had mistreated not only Poonam but his own family, was a wound too deep to heal. Deepak said that it wasn't just the theft of Poonam's jewelry or the affair in Bihar that led him to act. It was the way Anjan had destroyed the very core of the family unit. He spoke of how helpless he felt, of how the fear that Anjan's behavior would spiral even further motivated him to take the life of the man who had once been a father figure. What had once been a bond of family had soured into a toxic, irreparable relationship. The decision to kill Anjan, Deepak claimed, had come from a place of fury and self-preservation, with the belief that his mother and family could not live under such constant threat any longer. The confession was as chilling as it was revealing. Poonam and Deepak both agreed that the murder was not an act of passion, but rather a cold, calculated decision that had been a long time coming. It was revenge, but it was also a desperate bid to escape the horrors they had lived through. Poonam's words painted a picture of a woman who had been pushed to her absolute limit. Her life, from the very beginning, had been one of survival. Married off at a young age, she had endured years of struggle and hardship. Yet it was her relationship with Anjan that had been the most heartbreaking. From the moment they met, she had believed in a future of stability, a future where her children could live peacefully without the specter of poverty or danger. But Anjan's deception tore that dream apart. What began as a relationship built on hope had quickly soured, leaving Poonam feeling isolated and vulnerable. For Poonam, the murder was an act of survival. It wasn't just about ending Anjan's life. It was about ending the life she had been forced to live under his oppressive control. The pain of betrayal, the abuse of trust, and the fear that Anjan would only continue to hurt her family led her to one final, irreversible decision. For Deepak, the betrayal was personal. He had always been protective of his mother, but when it came to Anjan's behavior, Deepak could no longer sit idly by. He reflected on the years of emotional neglect, the fear that had crept into their home because of Anjan's increasingly erratic behavior. Deepak explained that his relationship with his stepfather had never been easy, but he had tried over the years to bridge the divide. However, each attempt had been met with lies, disrespect, and manipulation. When Deepak discovered Anjan's lewd actions toward his wife and sister-in-law, he reached a breaking point. In his confession, Deepak explained that he felt trapped. He had watched his mother suffer at the hands of a man who had once been a father figure to him, and he knew that Anjan's behavior wasn't just going to stop. It would only get worse. Deepak saw his stepfather as a threat to everything he held dear: his family, his sense of security, and his mother's safety. Poonam and Deepak's confessions revealed a disturbing truth. They had never truly considered the depth of what they were about to do. Their emotions had been so clouded by anger, frustration, and desperation that they failed to see how irreversible the consequences would be. As they spoke to the police, the gravity of their actions began to sink in. They had taken a life, Anjan's life, but at what cost to their own? The family they had tried to protect was now shattered by their own hands. The crime they had committed could never be undone. Their confessions brought no redemption, only the harsh reality of their actions. They were no longer victims of Anjan's manipulation. They had become perpetrators of a crime that would forever define their lives. Poonam and Deepak were swiftly arrested and charged with the brutal murder of Anjas Dasis, as well as the destruction of evidence. The legal proceedings began, and their case was followed closely by the media and the public alike. The scale of their crime, the calculated dismemberment of a man they had once called family, was almost too much to fathom. The once quiet family now found themselves at the center of a nationwide scandal, their names forever tied to one of the most gruesome murders in Delhi's recent history. As the trial began, Poonam and Deepak's defense team tried to argue that their actions were a result of years of suffering and abuse, and that the murder was carried out in a state of emotional distress. However, the prosecution made it clear that this was not a crime of passion, but a cold, calculated act. As the case unfolded, the details of the crime were laid bare in the courtroom. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: Poonam and Deepak's confessions, the CCTV footage, the recovered body parts, and the testimony of forensic experts. It became clear that this had been a cold-blooded, premeditated act, carried out not in the heat of the moment, but with calculated deliberation. Poonam, having endured years of emotional and financial manipulation, was sentenced to life imprisonment, as was Deepak. The court considered the level of premeditation involved and the brutality of the crime. However, some mitigating factors were considered: Poonam's years of suffering at the hands of Anjan and the fact that she was a mother protecting her family. Deepak's sentence was also life imprisonment, though he too was seen as someone pushed to the edge after years of witnessing his mother's suffering and Anjan's abusive behavior. The sentences were handed down after several months of deliberation. While the punishment could never truly bring justice to Anjan's memory, the verdict was seen as a way to prevent future acts of violence stemming from broken trust and unresolved family disputes. The public reaction was mixed. Some felt the punishment was too lenient, given the brutality of the crime, while others sympathized with the emotional toll Poonam and Deepak had suffered. Poonam and Deepak's sentences marked the end of a case that had captivated the country. But for the family members who knew them, the true cost of the crime was far greater than any punishment could have been. The lives of everyone involved had been irrevocably changed. As we reach the end of this tragic story, one question lingers. What could have been done to prevent this tragedy? Was there a point where Poonam and Deepak could have chosen a different path? Was there a moment where forgiveness or intervention might have stopped this unimaginable act from unfolding? It's hard to say. Perhaps they could have found a way to break free from the destructive cycle of abuse and deception. But once trust is broken, it can be impossible to repair. And sometimes the consequences of that betrayal are far more devastating than anyone could ever anticipate. This case serves as a stark reminder of how fragile the bonds of family can be, and how far-reaching the impact of broken trust can go. It raises troubling questions about human nature, about how far anger and desperation can drive us, and how the smallest decisions can spiral into irreversible acts of violence. The answers may never be clear, but one thing is certain: once trust is shattered, the fallout can be far-reaching and terrifying. We have uncovered this case. Now, we want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Poonam and Deepak could have taken a different path? Could they have found a way to resolve their frustrations without resorting to violence? Can you imagine a family member betraying you in such a brutal way? Please kindly share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. Did you find this story as shocking as we did? Let's talk about the complexities of trust, betrayal, and the lengths people will go to when they feel cornered. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a real-life true crime story, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with others who might be interested in these kinds of stories, and don't forget to subscribe for more jaw-dropping true crime content. We've got plenty of fascinating cases coming your way, so stay tuned and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single one. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back with more stories that will keep you thinking long after the video ends. Until then, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the darkest secrets lie hidden within the ones we love.